Welcome back to the Commerce Collective podcast brought to you by Flywheel. You're listening to This Month Above the Fold, a monthly series on the Commerce Collective feed where Patrick Miller, co-founder of Flywheel, and I cover the most important commerce topics each month, and this is your April 2025 episode. I'm Emma Irwin, brand marketing manager at Flywheel and host of this podcast. Today, we are talking about the current economic landscape and what's actually important for brands to understand, followed by a discussion on GenAI disrupting the mid-funnel. Let's get into it. But first, actually, I had some technical difficulties at the beginning of this recording, and once I could finally get in, I forgot to say hello or ask Patrick how he was doing like I usually do. What a terrible thing for a host to forget. But I can guarantee that my podcast team kept him entertained with cycling conversation. And I mean about bicycles. All right, cue the tariffs talk. So we're going to start off with talking a little bit about the economic landscape, impact on consumers, implications for brands, broader things we're seeing across, like going back to hinting at the de minimis and things that have happened. But okay, when tariffs went wild, it was called Liberation Day. Everyone went straight for saying that consumers are likely to completely alter purchasing or change their behaviors to reevaluate the situation. But that's not what happened. That's not what we're seeing happen. We have data that shows that there isn't really a sign of slowdown. Consumers maybe are making these preemptive purchases within the last 3 weeks or so. Can you give me your overview of what's happening, but from the lens of what brands actually care about?
Sure. Extreme volatility in lots of different ways. And so one of the things that we saw was, first and foremost, Amazon and other retailers pulling forward demand. And so increasing purchase orders by, roughly 50% or so in the weeks before the tariffs were scheduled to arrive. We also saw that consumers said, hey, I expect that price is going to go up. And so they became more focused on spearfishing for items that they plan to purchase. And so in aggregate, what we saw was that there is a decrease in glance views, but an extreme increase in conversion rate. And so customers were coming to the site with specific intent. This is what they want to buy before the tariffs, come into play. And so in both ways, we saw sort of a pull forward of demand, which is good short term, but mid to long term is a bit terrifying. And so now Amazon's long on inventory. And if you look at sort of the inventory position of the US versus the other countries, US is stark in sort of the pull through and sort of where Amazon is. And so if tariffs go through, okay, great. Amazon has a bunch of extra inventory. They can then pad margin for a little while or keep price low or whatever. But if tariffs don't go through, well, now all of a sudden, all these brands are long on inventory and they got to sell through, the inventory. At the same time, brands are looking at sort of, macroeconomic and an unstable consumer, and then they're starting to pull back on advertising in general. And so you have this sort of toxic potential cocktail around the corner of the sense that Amazon could be really long on inventory. The tariffs may not go through, but at the same time, the consumer is spooked and brands pull back on advertising, and thus they're stuck with they're sitting on a bunch of inventory and they got to figure out how to sell through it while they don't want to spend on promos or on advertising. And so, yeah, it's going to continue to be, choppy waters, as we look forward, and just sort of curious to see where, ultimately, where does the consumer land and how, resilient are they through what is certainly a turbulent time.
I believe if I did the math right, those 90-day tariff pauses, with the exception of China, those end right before Prime Day. And I think everyone's oh my gosh, what is going to happen with Prime Day? It's 4 days. Will it be the biggest ever? Because people are even making these purchases ahead of the holidays and they're expecting kind of more economic uncertainty and they're going to buy everything at once? Or is Prime Day going to be a flop? Do you have any thoughts there? I guess we'll see when Amazon places those Prime Day POs on May 19th or whatever. What else is going on? Do they need more inventory? I don't know.
Again, who knows? One interesting tactic I've seen some brands start to do is actually putting a line item bill for the tariffs on, and especially in the sort of the D2C brands who are saying, hey, this is going up because of, these tariffs. And look, and some of these brands are going to be able to eat part of it, within their margin. But for the most part, 144% increase, it's mathematically unreal to think that is not going to have an impact to average selling price. It just can't be eaten along the way. So how that ends up impacting sort of where is price currently, where is price retroactively, how does that then intersect with, a high promo period like Prime Day? It's going to be fascinating, but there's certainly opportunities for brands that are not, sort of not impacted by tariffs or minimally impacted by tariffs to use this as a chance to take share. And so I look at this year more than anything else where it's like likely top line is going to be muted, but brands that can sort of lean in here can take share from their competitors and be set up, next year for a lot of success.
I'd love to pivot to looking at China sellers and Chinese marketplaces because things are looking bleak for them at the moment. And so it's actually, I feel like it's been really fascinating to just watch how much Temu and Shein just skyrocketed. And then something so quickly can turn things around. And it's like, okay, what are your thoughts when it comes to what's happening for the Chinese sellers and marketplaces?
Well, I guess, number one, we saw Temu pull back on their spending, which was, a large portion of it was through Meta. So kudos to Meta for making a bunch of money on them, but also that, it works in the sense that you can see the Temu app dropping in the App Store rankings. And so, there's a real challenge there. The thing I kind of find most interesting is sort of, how sort of the de minimis provision worked and who it worked for and what does that mean going forward. And so we're, sort of easy to see that, Temu and Shein are negatively impacted here. Price is going to go up, et cetera, et cetera. Fine. More interesting to me, though, is well, who else does this impact that we might not be thinking about? And so in 2024, there are about 1.4 billion packages that went through. So that were de minimis packages. If I bar napkin out units, for Shein and Temu, Shein's about 1 million orders per day. So that's 365 million orders per year. Let's call Temu the same. Okay. So now we're up to 700-ish, 750 total de minimis, packages going through the mail. But there are 1.4 billion that actually did. So you're okay, and granted, this is all bar napkin math, but if that is true, you have 700 million packages that went through the de minimis process, and to who and what was happening there. And so, it hasn't been publicly reported, but I'm convinced that these were Amazon sellers that were bundling or Walmart sellers, and they were bundling up, their goods, keep it under the de minimis limit, shipping to, a house, rebundling them up, and then shipping them into an FC. And so they're able to make those savings. And so it's okay, so at first you'd be all right, well, then these people are now going to have to go through regular imports and duties and tariffs, and then the price is going to go up, and that's going to have a negative impact on Amazon and Walmart Marketplace. Or the other way to think about this is if I walk down a Target and I look at all of the widgets in the Target that were made in China, and you have lots of outstanding brands in these, in these aisles. You have Newell Rubbermaid, you have Crayola, whomever. And those folks, they're going to pay the tariffs, right? They're upstanding corporate citizens. Okay, well, if I'm, millions of Amazon sellers and I was hacking the de minimis provision, am I now going to be cool, here you go, here's my tariff? No, I'm going to try to get around it just like I was getting it around with the de minimis provision. And so then you start thinking about okay, I'm now a China seller. I'm going to I'm going to lower my price because I'm just selling it to myself basically in the States. And I'm going to get it down to sort of cost of goods sold. And then I'm going to assemble it in the States. And then I'm going to then increase the price. And so I'm going to hang on to my margin that way. So I'm going to totally get around, all these tariffs. And then, oh, by the way, who the hell is going to check it? Who's going to check millions and millions of, of packages coming in to make sure that they're paying the tariffs and that the value of the goods within each of these packages across these millions of Chinese sellers are accurate? You got to be kidding me. And so anyway, I just it's just how poorly thought out this whole thing is. It's yes, it's simple to see that this is going to hurt Shein and Temu. I got it. But there's all these other second order effects that people aren't thinking about that are going to reverberate for the months to come.
Your bar napkin math made a point there. And I think that's something I haven't seen covered at all in terms of all those other packages. And so takeaway there is that Chinese sellers are still going to figure out how to thrive, especially on a place like Amazon.
Well, maybe even more so. It's the established brands that are pulling in containers, for decades. They're going to pay the tariffs or they're going to try to reroute it through other countries, whatever. But for the most part, they're going to pay. The Chinese brands, they're going to try to hack it. And so what does that then mean, across, sort of the economy and then selection and then price on a retailer level?
Interesting. My last question for you related to tariffs things is this is more just a fun one. Have you seen anything crazy from any brands that you pay attention to in terms of how they're approaching telling consumers that they are or are not going to raise their prices? I've been watching my Instagram feed has been an absolute course in real life PR and things that are funny, and like other ones where I'm like, ooh, wow, someone let you post that. That's crazy. In terms of like some brands are like, all right, prices are increasing on this day. Do what you wish with this information. I've also seen ones from like bougie outdoor brands that are like, guess what? Our prices aren't increasing because we actually built a healthy margin business from the ground up and things like that. But anything interesting
you're
that
paying too much to those bougie outdoor brands.
Well, the people will do it. The people will buy. The bougie people will pay for the bougie outdoor stuff. But yeah, and then I've also seen like smaller European brands that still manufacture things in China that are like, oh yeah, we just can't ship to the US anymore. It doesn't make sense to send products to the US. But have you seen anything interesting in that regard?
One I haven't seen yet, but I expect to see is sort of the continued acceleration of secondhand marketplaces. And so like, last week, like I was looking for a sweater and I went to Patagonia and they didn't have my size. So I tried their worn wear, got a sweater, it was half off, and got a wool hoodie. It was nice. And, half the price I would have paid in retail. And so in a post-tariff world, it's like, all of a sudden that becomes even more interesting. And so you see this with like, Trek Bicycles does this with like their Red Barn deal. You see like the Real and sort of the luxury side. And so I think secondhand, this could be an interesting accelerant, especially since a lot of these retailers, have built out the infrastructure over the last couple of years. And now all of a sudden have had that much more of a pricing advantage. I think they could do extremely well in the near term.
Heck yeah. I love that point. Hello. I'm jumping in here to break up our stories with this month's Retail Insights Briefing. As a reminder, this is a new little segment each month where our Retail Insights team provides a brief on what's happening in retail, all backed by their data and research. And I get to take you through it. So, the team has been conversing with brands to understand how current strategies are being reevaluated or even overhauled due to the ongoing tariff and trade developments. Our content themes are all pretty related this month. I wonder why. Costs are rising or are anticipated to rise for many brands. We're hearing consistent themes, especially from those who manufacture in or source materials from China, but the impact still varies pretty significantly by category. Categories that heavily rely on international manufacturing, such as toys, baby, home goods, and electronics, are indicating the most urgent need for cost adjustments. While immediate cost pass-throughs aren't being widely approved, there's growing acceptance that increases may be necessary, particularly in these heavily impacted categories. What's extra interesting is how transparent these conversations are becoming. Brands are more openly sharing their cost challenges with retail partners, and we're seeing retailers demonstrate increased willingness to collaborate, a shift from just a few weeks ago. Based on our analysis, we expect to see category-specific adjustments rolling out gradually over the next 2 quarters in order to protect the margins most at risk, rather than universal or immediate increases across the board. And for brands that are in a position to be more proactive during this tariff uncertainty, there's an opportunity to strengthen positioning while competitors feel the need to pull back. The Retail Insights team is on top of what's happening and what's going to happen in retail, preparing you for success in the ever-evolving commerce landscape. You can reach out to me or head to Flywheel's website to have this data and reporting right at your fingertips. All right, I'll see you next month. Back to me. We're going to switch over to touching on GenAI again. And this time, you posted for the whole company this article from Bain that was talking about how GenAI, specifically in search, is disrupting kind of the middle part of the funnel. And to set the scene, I think, for people, I did this the other day. I was looking for a new pair of clogs. And so obviously I input these are the things that I want in my pair of clogs. And then like 4 or 5 or 6 products are given to me. And I was thinking about, okay, that kind of eliminated the entire awareness, discovery, and a lot of the consideration part of what is traditionally the path to purchase. And so my question for you is like, does it actually matter that GenAI is maybe taking out some of these pieces of the traditional path to purchase?
Let me ask you a different way. How do these companies make money long term, and how is that in tension or not with the incumbents? And so, like if I look at like Google earnings, last week, decent quarter, and they said that they're not yet seeing Gen AI impact their commercial searches. And so what that means is, all right, like, yeah, Patrick wants to cheat like on his book club and wants a summary of Infinite Jest. Like, yeah, he's typing it in. But like they don't make any money on that query anyway. So like, whatever. It's a little bit of additional marginal cost using GenAI, but like, whatever. But on the commercial ones, it's like, it's not yet impacting. And so to me, it's like, then there's this question of like, okay, well, how do the LLMs ultimately, make money? How does Google make money or other search engines like Amazon? And then where is this intention with one another, and where is there then opportunity? And so Google makes money on advertising. Right now, the LLMs are all subscriptions, but I would bet that longer term that advertising becomes a part of them. And so if you're then typing in a query, because the prompt is the same, whether it's a prompt or a search bar, it's the same damn thing. Like you're telling it what you want or some starting point. Okay, what does it then, serve up? How does it, get that information? And then how does it monetize either transactionally, i.e. I'm selling something, or subscription or advertising? And so somebody like Google's got to figure out like, okay, well, they make all this money, on advertising. If they then use, an LLM to surface it, like how do you insert advertising into the response from the LLM? And it's not easy, but it's kind of straightforward. And if I'm OpenAI, like kind of the inverse of like, okay, can I capture all these queries and can it be that much better? And I can then layer in the advertising or make enough on subscriptions to really confound Google. I don't know. I think it's sort of interesting for the brands. A lot of this is in certain ways, it's sort of like an SEO exercise in the sense of like, what is the LLM scraping? Like, where is it getting its information? And then what's actually, helpful? And so much of this, like SEO, especially on a retailer site, is a metadata game. And so one of the things I see people doing the most with the LLMs is getting them to make tables to compare different products and about the features that the customer cares about. And so like things like dimensions, unsexy, but really start to matter because, or weight of something. And so what are those attributes? And if I'm a brand, how do I make sure I have all of those attributes within my various, product listings so that when the LLM scrape them and then summarize them, it's able to show the attributes that it's able to find the attributes that each customer is querying on.
With that, I think like the best advice we can give brands is have your backend, have that metadata like really solidified, good to go, because that's what's being scraped. But I was also in my clog journey. It gave me like 6 products. And did I ask for a table? No. But I'm sure if I asked for a table, like it probably would have been a similar number of products that were outputted. But I've been thinking about how like that is a significantly reduced amount of real estate for any products to be surfacing in, like endless scroll. Obviously, none of this matters until this is like mass adopted in terms of a shopping method. But like the endless scroll, the search results page had thousands of products. This is 6. I feel like if I'm a brand, even if I'm optimizing for GenAI search, like this is still kind of scary that the real estate and what is being shown to customers or consumers is so small in terms of selection.
Yeah, but like how many SKUs are in a Walmart supercenter?
The bazillion.
120,000. And how many are on Amazon or Walmart Marketplace?
A lot more.
500 million. 6,000 times the selection. And so the variance between on the upward trajectory of a brick and mortar store to a marketplace is significantly more than the inverse that you're talking about. And so even if I look at like a regional grocery store, 30,000 SKUs versus a Walmart at 120,000-ish, you're talking like a 4x difference. And so even if you take it, so basically what you're saying, it's the difference between a selection of a Walmart, to a regional grocery store. Granted, it's not on a category by category basis, but you sort of see what I mean. And so for the brands, it's like, it's just a share game. And so, sort of share of impressions, share of eyeballs. And, and then the question will be, what do these various platforms expose, to customers or expose to brands in order to see that they are getting, the share that they expect. And so I think long-term that will be, sort of what are the new metrics that brands, you care about? And then what are the derivatives that, the platforms are willing to expose to the brands so that they then sort of participate in these LLMs. And part of that is feeding the LLMs good information. And so right now, like they're scraping in every direction they can or using Common Crawl or whatever. And then a lot of publishers are like locking things down. And so whether it's New York Times, suing or making a deal, or Axel Springer, or even Amazon saying, hey, don't scrape my reviews and making them really hard for folks to scrape. But right now, it's sort of information hoarding, in order to sort of best advantage publishers versus the LLMs. My expectation is that sort of starts to flip in the sense that much like, websites, and you can opine whether it's good or bad, allowed Google to scrape their sites in order to have a value transaction of, scrape and versus, hey, you get traffic. Something that will happen similar with the LLMs where brands can start to feed them information. And my guess is it's an exchange for some sort of information to understand how they're doing, on the thing.
Would you say that in all of this, like it feels like finding those opportunities and building awareness of your products outside of search is like even more important in a world where search is consolidated and it's much more straightforward. Like, would you agree with that the upper funnel and kind of how you're approaching social and finding and maybe even STV increases in importance or not really?
Oh, absolutely. But I don't think in certain ways, it's same as it ever was. Like, are you a widget manufacturer or are you building a brand? And if you're a widget manufacturer, then you're just going to be in like fighting across, the other Chinese sellers and repackaging whatever you bought off of AliExpress and, whatever. It's kind of a miserable existence. If you're building a brand, it's how do you build the brand? What does that marketing look like? And whether that's paid, whether that's earned, whether that's owned, it's sort of, okay, all the things work, but ultimately you want, whomever your customer base is to know you, love you, and be willing to pay for you.
Same as it ever was for all my Talking Heads fans. Beautiful. Okay, I think that wraps us up. And that's it for this month's Commerce News. Join us next month for our recap of what happened and what's interesting in commerce. I'm putting money on that we'll continue to talk about tariffs and the economy. Plus insights from our Retail Insights briefing. I'm Emma Irwin, and I will see you next time.